Hi, and welcome to our webinar on how to achieve the best possible price for your land or property. So in effect, how to generate a bidding war. Bidding is the sort of major competitive system that we operate in our modern method of sale. Many of you will know that traditionally a property is presented for sale with an asking price, and I always think, frankly, certainly as an investor myself, when I see an asking price, actually what I think is, how much can I get off that asking price? Can I work down over? And actually, the modern online method of sale that we use is geared towards competitive bidding, and therefore really promotes the mindset and the thought that in order to be successful in winning a property, you have to work upwards from the starting point. So all really engineered to achieve the best possible price for the seller. So what we just want to do in this session is go through some of the tips or issues that we see from both buyers and sellers side, so that as a buyer you can prepare yourself and your property in the best possible way before it goes to market to achieve the best possible price. And the first one, really probably the relatively obvious one in terms of avoiding negotiation, is just to keep the property in a good state of repair. I'll speak a little about landlord and tenant properties because I know lots of our clients, that's the property type that you'll be considering presenting for sale, but it can often be worthwhile just looking at and maybe seeking some advice about how a property is presented and what investment might add value for a sale. Some investment, obviously, naturally isn't viable, wouldn't add any value to the ultimate sale price, but there are occasions when it is viable to make some improvements in order to improve your selling position. And this happens with tenanted properties quite often. We've had sellers who have encouraged or helped tenants to improve decor and make improvements in the property, and they've actually solely done that with the purpose of presentation for sale. Because what we'll see from buyers is when buyers view, we will get feedback, and if there are things they are concerned about in properties, sometimes before we then present a future property for sale, we can say, actually, well, that is going to concern a buyer. Let's deal with it and address it before a property is presented for sale. And in effect, it reduces the number of negotiation points that a buyer may have, which puts you as a seller in a better place. So it is a property by property assessment, but I think certainly we would say it is worth looking at a property, be it tenant or vacant, before presentation to look at how it can be best sort of presented to the market. And sometimes that does mean working around a tenant, which is something that we've done successfully and on numerous occasions in the past. Again, focusing on tenanted properties, this is something that sadly we see quite frequently, and a client we've been working with had this problem with an auction sale. It wasn't with the partner that we work with, another auction company with whom we have no relationship. Had sold this gentleman a property. On completion, it turned out that he'd been told it was tenanted, but on completion, he was told they have no tenant details, no tenancy, no certificates, no selective license. So in effect, he was left with having completed on the property, believing that it is tenanted, but with absolutely no way of verifying, checking, assessing, no way to contact the tenants, no means of collection of rent, no evidence that everything was compliant, that the gas was safe, that any of the things were in place. So an absolute disastrous example, but I think as a more reasonable level, if we are a landlord bringing a property to the market for sale, what I would say, making sure the tenancy file is correct, that the tenancy is in place, that everything was issued at the commencement of the tenancy that needed to be. So things like your right to rent being checked, was the how to rent guide issued, was the bond dealt with correctly, and at the point of sale are all the certificates in place, your gas, your EPC, EICR, etc. I say this because if a potential buyer comes along and sees holes or issues with some of these things, it will be something that just concerns them, spikes their attention, and could be a potential point of negotiation for them. So it's best to, in effect, get all your ducks in a row and have all of these things in place, correct, compliant, before presenting a property to the market for sale if it's tenanted. Again, it just takes away anything that can give a buyer doubt about the robustness of a tenancy file, because in effect what a buyer wants is an absolutely solid investment property, which means a good tenant and paperwork that's correct and paperwork that exists and is transferable. So If you were concerned before presenting a tenanted property in the market, that's something MRP could certainly help with in terms of doing a tenancy audit, checking everything is as it should be, and then moving forward to sale, or engaging with the letting agent. I'm sure they'd help, but it's certainly something MRP relocations would help with. But it's certainly advisable before presenting for sale that work is done. Really, what we want to do is remove any friction points with buyers. We want to give them nothing to come back and haggle and negotiate with. So we just take all these points away before anything gets presented for sale. Communication with the tenant and not scaring them off. This is something the letting agent arm of our business is, become quite adept at. And it really is just about good communication. I'm going to say a little bit more further on about the benefits to all parties of a sale of a property with a tenant. But certainly I'll just say at the moment that in terms of handling the relationship with the tenant, my lettings team are very sort of up to speed with communicating carefully with the tenant, making clear to a tenant that sale of their property to another landlord is an opportunity for them. They will potentially attend viewings. It is the tenant's opportunity to present themselves as part of the deal, as a tenant who wants to stay for the long term, possibly as a tenant who perhaps wants some investment in the property going forward. So tenants often see this as a scary and risky time, where we like to present it as an opportunity. It's an opportunity for them to present themselves as part of the ongoing deal, to build a relationship with their new landlord, and to present themselves in the best possible light. So for some landlords, in fairness, for some tenants, sale by the current landlord can be exactly what they want if the relationship hasn't been great, and that's a benefit that we sometimes play on. So what we will explain to tenants is actually, if they've had frustrations with their landlord in the past, rightly or wrongly, we can very much play the card of actually this property being sold onto a new landlord might be the best thing for their tenancy, that we can build into the package some investment if the property needs it. So certainly I know a lot of landlord sellers are cautious about selling with tenant, feeling they'll lose the tenants. In our experience, if before the sale commences, it is carefully and delicately communicated to the tenants, and those benefits and opportunities are explained, we find that we don't lose tenants in the process. I think what does scare tenants off is when a board just appears, they know nothing about it. You will get tenants moving on because they feel they're going to lose their home. But actually, if it's well communicated, which is exactly what we propose to do, it doesn't necessarily mean that the tenant has to move on or will move on. And we would bring them along as part of the process, bring them in as part of the, the selling to the new landlord. The tenant is part of the deal. So, don't necessarily be afraid of that, but do think carefully about, handling of the tenant and tenancy before a property goes to market, is sort of our tip in that regard. And then rent level. We have seen numerous and many cases of self-managed landlords who have allowed their rent level to dip and drop below the market level. And in fairness, I appreciate that people think they're doing a kind thing. They're helping the tenant by having a rent level that's fair or below market value, and that's all very admirable. However, when a property is presented for sale, the incoming buyer will be looking at the yield they're going to achieve. Now, if that rent level has dropped tens or hundreds of pounds below what it could be achieving, it is actually going to affect your selling price, because the value to the incoming buyer has been reduced by the low rent level. Yes, we can advertise properties and say the actual market rent should be, but really what a buying landlord wants to see is that investment is achieving the level of rent that it should be. So we do see with a lot of landlords who try to be kind to tenants, tenants who've been there for many years and the rent levels drop below. Yeah, it's a nice thing to do, but it can cause landlord-seller some problems in terms of the sale, even in terms of the buyer's mortgage, because it may be that low rent level won't meet the criteria for the mortgage company, for the buyer. So it's one of those things, I guess, we're trying to be nice, keeping rent levels low, keeping tenancies affordable for tenants who are in place, but just be cautious of that. As a seller, you may be disadvantaged in your position when you present your property for sale. So have that in mind in terms of rent level. And certainly if you are thinking of presenting for sale, our rent review might be a timely thing to do before you move towards a sale, just to make sure, is the rent level optimal because the rent level and the yield the property achieves will be a big part of the selling price that's achieved. So certainly a rent review via someone like MRP or a letting agent is something that you could wisely do when you are considering presenting your property for sale. Now,